Good books inspire you to become a reader, but great books inspire you to become a writer. Welcome to Detangle, where we untangle the complexities of life one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Dr. Kinjal Goel, a psychologist and a writer. Some moments in our life make us realize that dreams can actually come true. I have my absolute favorite writer and forever inspiration, Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni, with me today on Detangle. One of the hardest things for any reader is to pick their favorite book. For me, after nearly 3 decades of reading, it is and always will be The Palace of Illusions by Chitra. Apart from this one, she has written multiple bestsellers, 21 in all, some of which have been adapted into films, theatre, and the opera as well. The winner of multiple awards, Chitra is truly your quintessential writer and speaker. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you today, ma'am.
Thank you, Kinjal. I am very excited to be speaking with you.
Well, let's get started then. Like I said, I don't think we are going to be able to get everything into this podcast because with you, I can talk forever. So here goes. Take us down memory lane with you. When and how did this journey start? Were you always a storyteller?
No, actually, I was not. I did not write anything at all until I went to the United States
Oh,
for
really?
my college. Yeah. I was always a big reader, but I never thought I had a talent, and no one else also thought I had a talent. So it was only after I immigrated. I think the act of immigration forced me into writing.
Wow. So it was life experiences which brought out a skill that you didn't know you had.
That's right. And that, and also I was feeling very homesick for India. I was missing my family. I was missing a familiar lifestyle. So I think that angst also forced me into writing.
Wow. Which brings me to my next question that your books and your writing have been an inspiration to so many, including me. But has there been a pivotal moment or experience in your life that significantly influenced your approach to writing? Like you said, immigration was one of them. Has there been anything else?
I think another major moment occurred when I started doing community service,
Hmm.
activism in the area of domestic violence. And I joined an organization as a volunteer in the San Francisco Bay Area where I
This
was
is
living.
Maitri, isn't it?
This is that time there was no Maitri. This was
Ah.
a this was a mainstream organization called Support Network.
Ah.
And when I was working with women who were in, terrible situations of domestic violence and abuse, one day something very rare happened, which is a woman of Indian origin came to our office. And so, it was not even my day to be a volunteer, but they called me in so that I could talk to her in Hindi. And during the course of the day, she showed me her back, which was completely lacerated. And I think that just left such a mark on me, especially because at that point we were telling her it was dangerous for her to go back to her home. Her life was being threatened, and she went with us to the shelter. But that weekend she called her husband and he came and picked her up, and we never heard from her, and she'd been too afraid to give us her real name, so we had no way of contacting her. So I never knew what happened to her. I never saw her again. But, just the last thing she said to me, which really I think made me into a writer, was she looked me in the eyes and she said, "Who in this country cares what happens to me? Nobody even knows who I am."
Wow.
And I thought, wow, I'm going to, write books about women like her and women like me so that people will care about our stories, both people from within our community and outside our community. They will at least know who we are.
That's powerful. Somehow this reminds me of that part in Palace of Illusions where Draupadi thinks that if she has to be avenged by a man, I mean, if her honor has to be avenged by a man, it will never happen.
Right, right.
Mhm.
In some ways, we women we want to be cooperative with everyone, but ultimately we need to take our lives into our own hands and fight for ourselves if we need to.
Fantastic. This is a side of you I didn't realize I would be exploring on this podcast, but this is amazing. Truly.
And then, Kinjal, I went on to become one of the co founders of Maitri because we felt that we needed a South Asian service that women from our background would feel comfortable and they would feel like, we really understood them. We understood their social constraints. We understood their family backgrounds.
But that's so wonderful. I've been reading about Maitri, and I think it's just such a powerful organization, and more power to people like you who are really committed and who want to do something in every way possible, not just, in large bits or in magnificent ways which are seen, but in all the ways that matter. So, congratulations on that.
Well, thank you. I mean, I just feel thankful. And now I'm on the advisory board of a similar organization here in Houston, where I live, and that is called Daya. And that's also a wonderful, similar organization to help people who are in distress.
Beautiful, really. So, Chitra, a lot of books that you have written, a lot of the books that I have read have been historical fiction by you. And I'm sure this requires, delving into psychology of a bygone era. I mean, you've written about the Rani of Jindan in The Last Queen. But how do you bridge this gap? Because when I read your books, I don't feel like there is a time gap or a chasm separating me from your characters. So, how do you bridge this between contemporary readers and characters from such a different time?
Well, thank you for saying that. And that is always my hope when I write. It's because I think it is because I always try to get inside the character, to see the world through that character's eyes. Because I think, no matter when we were born, uh, as human beings, as women, we want the same things, we long for the same things, we are afraid of the same things. The same kind of things make us angry or upset, or they make us feel fulfilled. So there's a human element to my characters that I really try to explore. And I always try to put myself in their shoes and think, well, how would I behave? How would I feel? What might I say given my constraints, given my social background? What will I say? So I think there is one part of a character that is social or historical, but a bigger, more important part of that character is the human angle. And that's what I always focus on, even though, try to do as best research as I can about the historical aspect.
I think that's what makes everyone connect because eventually, like you said, we are all ever changing but never changing.
You've said it very nicely, Kinjal.
Thank you. I'm also aware that, like you said, you spend a lot of time in research before you start working on a new book. But has there ever been, a surprise discovery that you've made during this process, something you didn't expect to find out about your character?
Well, it's more like I found out something important about myself and my process. So this is actually when I was doing the research for The Last Queen, which, as you
Mhm.
mentioned, is the story of Maharani Jinda, the youngest wife of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. And her story is lost. Largely it was lost to people of contemporary times. Although she was an amazing woman, she was so brave. And, she was very feisty. She had a temper. She was able to preserve the kingdom for her infant son after Maharaja Ranjit Singh dies. So, quite a special person. So I was determined that I was going to write this book, and I had created all my plans to visit places that were important to her. There was a big prison where the British had imprisoned her and where she escaped. She escaped from that prison. Then she hiked all the way by herself to Nepal. Then she was reunited with her son, whom the British had taken away from her. She was reunited with him after many years in Calcutta,
Mhm.
now Kolkata. And I wanted to see as many of those places as possible. But then COVID happened. So I didn't go anywhere and I couldn't see any places. And I was like, how can I write this novel? And then I started looking at paintings and photographs of that time. And actually, what seemed to be a real negative turned into a real positive, because those images gave me a sense of those places that if I had visited, for example, if I had visited uh, that fort, that
Mm-hmm.
fortress where she had been imprisoned. It's not like that anymore. It's become a big tourist attraction,
True.
right? And I just would not have gotten the atmosphere. But by looking at some old paintings and photographs, I got a sense. I got a sense also of the Lahore, the city of Lahore that she had grown up in, and Maharaja Ranjit Singh's palace, how it had looked at that time. And so I realized something. I realized that I don't have to go physically to places to research them. Images for me, I think I'm a very visual person. So images are a great resource. And so after that, when I went on to write my newest novel, Independence, which
Mm-hmm.
is set in the 1940s, and it's about India's freedom movement, and especially how women were involved in it, I didn't even try to go anywhere. Of course, I knew some of the places that appear in the book, like the city of Kolkata, where I was born and spent many years. But I never felt like I had to go somewhere. I just went straight to the newspapers and the photographers of that time, and I got so many powerful visual images, powerful and heartbreaking visual images of partition that end up then being a big portion of my book, an important aspect of my book. So I learned something. I learned two things. One is I learned something specific about doing research. And the second thing I learned is when one door opens, you know, maybe a
Mm-hmm.
better door, one door closes, maybe a better door opens up for us.
How lovely. So, a lot of people always have said, I mean, over the years you've been reading about it, that write what you know. But now there are disruptive writers who come out and say, write what you don't know. But in your case, I feel like you've been writing what you want to know and you've been trying to
Yes,
know.
that's a very good way of putting it. Yes, these are women that I want to know more about. Yes, you know, they came onto my horizon one way or another. But women like Draupadi, women like Sita, women like Maharani Jinda, you're right. I really want to explore them, to know about them, and to figure out their secrets. What made them such strong women who stood up against adversity? Because I have a lot to learn from them, and I hope that my readers will also find that they're learning something.
What an inspired way to write, really.
Thank you.
So, do you have any set routine or rituals? I've noticed in my interactions with you that you're extremely punctual, that you don't miss, even a minute here and there. You're not online when you're not supposed to be. I've been asking you this over the past few years, like, what you do to get into a routine. So, this is a question for all my, listeners today. What kind of rituals or routines that you follow which help you finish so many projects?
Well, the first thing is kind of it's a lifestyle thing. It's not so much of a routine. And this is something I tell my students at the University of Houston. They are all creative writers. They're all working on their books, many of them on their first books, many of them on their second books. And they often ask me, well, exactly what you asked me. So I tell them the first thing you need to do is to cut out unnecessary things from your life, especially unnecessary drama. Let's cut out all that drama. We do what we need to, we do what we enjoy and what nourishes us. But as human beings, we fritter away so much time and energy on things that we won't even remember 6 months down the line. So I think I've just cut a lot of things out of my life so that writing now has become a big portion of my life. And because I've cut out many things, I have more time for it.
How lovely. Also, you like you mentioned, you haven't been a writer all your life, but this is something you learned. So, did you also get any formal education in writing?
No, by the time I decided to become a writer, I had already finished my PhD, which was in English literature. So it gave me a great background into wonderful books and novels and short stories. So I was familiar. I mean, those great books really became my teachers, I should say. Um, but after that, maybe I took a class here and there, but I was working full time. I had a family, I had two little kids. I had no time to like stop all that and go take a degree course anywhere. And there are advantages and disadvantages to it. I mean, there are certainly such great advantages if you are enrolled in a program. I see that with my students because that's their number one job. That is what they're supposed to be
Right.
doing, writing. And they're getting a lot of help, instruction, and camaraderie as they're doing it. So I recommend that for everyone, but that was not my path.
Wonderful. I'm going to ask you a tough one now. Do you have any favorite book from your own, or any book whose process was more special than the others?
Well, I have a pair. So I'm going to answer you, but with a pair. And that pair is The Palace of Illusions and The Forest of Enchantments. I had wanted to write those books for a long, long time. I think I was just afraid to write them because they are such major projects and I respect the originals so much, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. But I always felt that these women, these heroines of these great epics, Sita and Draupadi, have been misunderstood in our culture and they have been projected in society in some very negative ways. Draupadi is seen as the troublemaker. She's the one who causes the Mahabharata war. Sita is seen as always meek, mild, obedient, putting up with whatever terrible thing happens to her. And then we are told as Indian women, the idea is we should be like them. Now, I 100% agree that we should be like Sita and Draupadi. I just have a different understanding of Sita and Draupadi. Sita was very strong. She was so, she was so resolute. She chose to go into the forest to be with her beloved Ram. When she was abducted by Ravan, she had so much strength of character and personality that he did not harm her. He did not even, yeah, he didn't even lay a finger on her when she was living uh, when she was his captive in Lanka. And when she is banished at the end by Ram, when she's, heavily pregnant, she manages. She becomes one of our very first single mother characters. And she is so successful at that. She brings up two beautiful children with all the right values. So I really wanted to reinterpret these two books. And that was my most difficult project. It took me a long, long time to write both of those books, to do a lot of research
And
and
I
a lot
think
of soul search. I think there was research and then there was soul search.
absolutely. I mean, to look at characters who've been so important in our lives and to be able to add our own soul to them, it takes a lot. I also
Thank
think
you.
these books have found very important spots in people's lives. I know a lot of people who resonate very deeply with these two books, both of them, The Forest of Enchantments and The Palace of Illusions, because, like you rightly said, we've been raised on a diet of what we should be like, or of what we should aspire to be like. And you basically change the whole ingredients of the recipe, and now we are aspiring to be the same people but in a slightly different way.
You've put it really well. That is exactly my project. And we are aspiring now to an ideal of womanhood that is positive and empowering and also says women don't need to be perfect. We are just human beings. It's okay for us to have human faults.
Truly. So, all these years of writing, Chitra, how many years has it been now since you published your first book?
Oh my goodness. I think I published my first book in 1994. No,
Wow.
91. I started with poetry. So I published in 91.
So, all these years of writing, these decades of publishing, how do you stay relevant? How do you update your own skill sets as a writer?
I keep reading. And I'm blessed because I'm teaching also. So I have to keep up, right? In order
Mm.
to be of help to my students, I have to keep up with new writers. I have to keep up with new ideas. I just have to keep up with how my much younger
Hmm.
students are, what do they relate to, what are their questions, what are they excited about. All of that, I think, helps to keep me relevant. And also, current affairs, what's going on with women, what's going on in the world, but especially also in India. These are very, very important to me.
Fantastic. So when you publish a book about a certain character or about a certain time, I'm sure you understand the demographic very well. A certain book will do very well, maybe let's say in India, another book will do very well, let's say in the States. I'm sure you get a better understanding of your audiences based on how your book is doing, right?
To some extent, books have always surprised me, and I don't think too much about what will happen to the book after it is published. My job is to try and make it the best possible book I can. And in fact, if I start thinking too much about audience or market or, more financial oriented things, I think my art will suffer. So I try not to think about those things. Those will happen the way they will happen. When I wrote Palace of Illusions, I had no idea that it would turn into this major bestseller, that it would be taught in so many colleges and universities, that so many people, I think literally thousands of people, have written to me saying that it changed their lives. I am just very thankful. And I just send a humble a namaskar to the universe that the book did that way. I had no idea. I was just writing the book that I felt was important. Same with Forest of Enchantments. I was really worried that people would, not like my interpretation of Ram and Sita and the Ramayana. So I never know when a book is going to be successful. And the same in the United States. I never, my books that became bestsellers here, I was delighted, but I had not expected it. And then, there are other books which did very well academically and they're taught at universities, but they're not such popular books, maybe in the United States. And that too, I never know what a book is going to do.
Wow.
So I leave that to God. One of the things that I really believe in, and for many years I've been studying the Bhagavad Gita, and one of the statements in the Gita that has really, really affected me says, it is your job is to just do your duty, and you have to leave the results to a higher power. So I really believe that.
How wonderful and how powerful, and yet it's a complete surrender. So you've done it all. You have taken control and you have given up control, and that's how your process begins.
It's always, it's a work in progress. Some days I do better at it than other days. Surrender is truly important, but it is not easy.
Absolutely. So, as a fellow writer, I have a question for you. It's extremely scary. It's a place of deep vulnerability when you put your words out there. It's almost like putting your heart out of your body and allowing it to walk by itself, completely bare and completely available for everyone to see. So when you finish a project, do you feel spent? Do you feel tired? Do you need to take a break before you start your next book? Or do you just jump into your next one?
Well, usually before I finish my project, an idea has already started percolating somewhere inside for the next book. So, that idea is already kind of pushing at me, saying, okay, okay, pay attention to me now. But
Oh,
generally,
wow.
I will give myself some time because I feel that the previous book and its atmosphere and its characters, they have to leave my system, and they have to leave a space, enough of a space for the new world, the new characters to come in. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. I think it's the most visual way that anybody could describe what they're going through because you live with your characters. Like you said, you explore your characters. And until you spend some time with them in another metaverse, you don't really get what you do, in books like yours. So you have to come back from that metaverse into your own and then start
That's
fresh.
right. That's right. So I always take a little time. I'm already often thinking about the book, and maybe doing a little light research about it. But I won't start writing until that inner space is clear and ready for a new character to inhabit it.
How lovely. Now, this brings me to my next question. I ask this question to all my podcast guests. We all need a physical first aid box in the house where, we keep a band aid, some painkillers, maybe some antiseptic lotion, some of those days when we have minor cuts and bruises and we need to take care of ourselves. Similarly, if you were to have a mental first aid box in your house where you could put all the things that make you happy as soon as you see them, maybe some photographs, maybe some song codes, what would it be? What would you put in your box?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would put photos of my family. I'm sure that's not a surprise to anybody, especially of my children, and especially their photos from when they were little. Because I remember, I mean, I love my children even now. They are, young men. They're in their late 20s, but there was a special bond and a special love when they were little. So I love to see those photos. They always bring a smile to my face. They bring very good memories to me. And that would be one. I think I would put my Gita, my Bhagavad Gita, in that box because when I have trouble, I always go, and not only in times of trouble, even in times of happiness, I'd like to turn to the Gita, which always has a message for me. Quite often, I will open the Gita at random and just see what comes up. And it's always an appropriate message from the universe. So I'm very thankful to, this spiritual text for guiding my life. I think I would put some music. I would put two kinds of music, or maybe several kinds of music. I would put some Robindra Shongit, the songs that I grew up with. I would put some Sanskrit chants, especially like Shankaracharya's um, Nirvana Shatakam, which talks about the nature of the self. And I would put some songs by the Beatles because our whole family likes Beatles
How
songs.
lovely.
So I think those would be some of my things in my special box.
Well, that's beautiful. I hope you do end up making one because sometimes, you just need that little pick me up after a bad day, and these boxes can come really handy.
I think that's a great idea, Kinjal.
Well, now let me ask you something which I know you can't talk much about, but something that I really want to know about. You have a new project brewing. Can you tell us something about it?
Yes, this is a very different project. And as you said, I am not allowed under contract to speak too much about it, but
Mhm.
I'll tell our listeners this that it's a nonfiction project. So it's a very different area for me to explore. And the reason I took on this project is it is about two people who I really admire, and I'm bringing their lives to my readership. And I was very inspired by them because not only are they very successful, but they're also very philanthropic, and just examining how they came from a very ordinary background, reached great heights, and also did so much good and are doing so much good in society, in the community, in the whole country. I found it very inspiring. So I'm waiting. The book should be out by the end of this year. And any day now, I think the publisher will announce the subject matter.
Oh, wow.
but,
I'm sure we all
but,
can't wait.
but yes, it's been very interesting to write nonfiction.
How lovely. I hope it turns out to be just like your other books, absolutely exciting, inspiring, and a page turner. I don't know how you manage it every single time, but they're all really fast reads.
Thank you. Thank you.
As we come towards the close of the podcast, I leave the floor open for you to ask me any question as a psychologist. Is there something that you would like to know?
Yeah, I think what I would like to know is how can a reader, how can a writer really connect to readers? How can a writer, or what can a writer do? Can a writer do something to make sure that their books touch something deep in people's lives especially people who are undergoing problems? How can they write books that inspire people?
Wow, if I had the answer to that, I would be the guest on a podcast. But I think what you're saying and what you have said throughout our conversation are actually the answer to this question. If you're honest and if you're true and if you've really done your homework, a lot of writers nowadays have been writing, based on what they find online, just a snippet here, a snippet there. And most readers are quite intelligent and they can see through it that you haven't really done anything to bring them honest work. So it's your honesty as a writer. I'm sure even in your case, when a reader picks up your book, it's just a few pages and they realize, okay, this is true stuff. There may be an element of fiction to it, but there's a lot of hard work and honesty that has gone into the project. And that's how people connect. You cannot bluff your way through, and you cannot bluff your way through any audience. In fact, I had Javed Akhtar Saab on one of my episodes, and what he said really, really stayed with me. He says, always have respect for the audience. Don't look at them with contempt. Don't think कि ये तो ऐसे ही हैं, कुछ भी सुन लेंगे. He says, no, write with respect. And as a psychologist, I think all of us need that. We need to be validated as readers. We need to be respected as readers. So a writer which makes me personally feel respected is a writer I always gravitate towards.
That's a very good statement. That I will keep that in mind. And yes, you are so right. I agree. I have and I should always have respect for my readers, no matter what kind of background they come from, and make my work at once true but also available to them. Make it something that they can relate to.
Absolutely. Well, Chitra, this has been one of the most beautiful mornings for me. And it has culminated in this beautiful discussion, in this conversation, where, like I started, I'm going to repeat those lines again. A good book inspires you to be a reader, but a great book inspires you to be a writer. And believe me, you have been a personal inspiration to me. Whenever I write, I look at your work and I look at the depth of your work and I say, if words can be so beautifully put, I want to be the one doing it too. So thank you. Thank you for being who you are. Thank you for the wonderful body of work that you have created for us. And it's going to be there for posterity. Generations will read them. What you have done is a kind of service that very few people end up doing. It may not feel like service now, but eventually it's just there for, everyone to taste and savor and relish. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for those very kind words. And like they say, from your mouth to God's ears, I surely hope that my books will continue in their small way to inspire people, because that would make it all worthwhile. All of the hard work, all of the late nights, all of the times when, I've had to carve time away from family or other things that I wanted to do. That is what would make it all worthwhile. So thank you, Kinjal, for having me on this lovely podcast.
Thank you so much, Chitra.